Hi, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm very happy and excited to be introducing one of my favorite artists on behalf of our UCSD School of Visual Arts, Jennifer Bolande. Jennifer is a Los Angeles-based artist working across many different mediums while holding a singular, important voice. When I think of what it means to be a Los Angeles-based artist, I think of figures like Jennifer and how they are the original model of what this is. Jennifer is part of the foundational conversation that we all contend with as artists in Southern California today, while she continues to further that conversation in her own wake. As an artist attached to the pictures generation, Jennifer has used modes of appropriation and a keen eye looking at the forms and material of representation and communication as a kind of clarifying act. Her work looks at the materiality that delivers to us our mythologies, fantasies, and identities, particularly around the imagery of Los Angeles, what it means to be an artist looking at the substance of what makes up the city materially and psychically. Jennifer has been a great inspiration for me personally. While developing my own practice in Los Angeles, it became clear that many of the most important makers and thinkers in LA have been women, so consciously making work, often with film and video, around what it means to be producing in relationship to current times and the specific setting of our current place on Earth. Jennifer's work stood out to me as a specific trajectory that really excited me. Sculptures of marquees, postcard stands, and a director's chair, the vernacular of my own fantasies, recontextualized and examined, at times both abstracted and complicated. When I see Jennifer's work, I ask myself the question, what is content? What can we do with it? I wonder about modes of transmission. The work plays around with ideas of production, reception, and imagination. This conceptual rigor found in Jennifer's practice, of course, has been passed down to her students at UCLA. Her work there has become a grand legacy that has produced many of the most important artists that structure what the art scene looks like in LA. Jennifer has a very rich and overwhelming exhibition history, showing within many historic rosters, such as those at Margot Levin and Metro Pictures. I had the great opportunity of seeing Landmarks, a survey exhibition at Luckman Gallery, Cal State LA, that then traveled to the Institute of Contemporary Art, Philadelphia. Most recently, she had a show that opened at Pio Pico in Los Angeles called The Composition of Decomposition that then moved to Magenta Plains, New York. She's also taken part in exhibitions like Desert X and internationally at some of the most important institutions such as LA MoCA, the Swiss Institute, the Hirshhorn Museum, and the Hammer Museum. Once again, thank you for joining us. Welcome to Jennifer Bolande.
Thank you, Nicole, for the lovely introduction. I thought I'd read, I just was given the dread task of writing a biographical blurb, and I reviewed a really old artist statement that I wrote, which I think is still true. And so I thought I'd start by reading that just to get used to doing this on Zoom and hearing my voice and talking to a screen. So, okay, my work is often cited on that which is in the process of changing, becoming obsolete, or disappearing. I'm continually drawn to objects and images which have somehow lost their spatial, temporal, or cultural moorings. My work is involved with salvaging, archiving, and also reanimating, of bringing new life to some dormant, overlooked, or nearly extinct aspect of the cultural landscape. In certain works, the chosen objects or sites were once heralds of futuristic vision, modern appliances, modernist towers, movie marquees. My task as an artist becomes one of animating vision, of re-examining or bringing to life. Oh, I just repeated that, sorry. It's landmarks, monuments, and peripheral players whose roles are often significantly inverted in my work. I hover at the boundaries between past and future, audience and performer, masculine and feminine, mind and body. The experience of embodied understanding is central to much of my work. To this end, I often use a variety of strategies to bring pictures back into physical space to elicit an embodied response. Through my work, I inhabit a variety of roles: explorer, documentarian, librarian, sleuth, flaneur, projectionist, clown, choreographer, scientist, poet, director, editor, engineer, builder, witness. Each work takes me on some kind of adventure into the outside world, and also on an internal autobiographical voyage examining relationships between time, memory, projection, and perception. My working process varies, but generally there's a performative phase to my work, which frequently carries me into foreign, often masculine territory of some kind. The world of softcore porn films, rock and roll amplifiers, big rig trucks, corporate architecture, the White House. This is followed by a documentary phase, which encompasses photography, film, video, writing, and drawing, a usually lengthy distillation and editorial process, and eventually the aspects of these processes are combined with new elements and physical acts and changed into a new form. Okay, so now I'll share screen. Okay. So I began doing dance performance and choreography, and I was influenced by Yvonne Rainer and Simone Forti in particular. They both had come to teach at my art college at the time. And I had studied ballet as a teenager, and I was very sort of excited to integrate art and dance and movement. So here is me in 1976 or 77, something like that. This performance involved, sort of their plants in the audience, and everything was timed and structured. I was holding a stopwatch. You can see someone running in the background. He was a plant. So the audience wasn't really sure what the main event was and what was in the background, and what was just randomly happening. So also kind of, influenced obviously by John Cage. But here's another piece at that time, a dance that I did in a burlap bag. So I'm just showing, kind of greatest hits so we can move through this in a fairly timely manner. So this, as Nicole mentioned, I went to New York when I was still in art college and wasn't sure if I was going to be a dancer or an artist. And I was there for the pictures exhibition, working at the gallery artist space where it was shown. And I met a lot of those artists and kind of realized that I was more interested in art than in dance. And however, you'll see there's remnants, there's references to movement throughout my work and embodiment. So even though I shifted to working with pictures and found images and objects from the media and urban landscape, there was always still this sort of interest in, embodied experience and I think movement. Even though my work often looks very still, there's movement always in and around it. Something has either just happened or is about to happen, or something's happening in kind of imaginative space. So this is a series called the White House Drawings, and I found these images of the White House in Time magazine, and I cropped them in a way that kind of, it sort of was decentered from what you were really supposed to be looking at. I was looking as if I was a fly on the wall or someone who didn't understand the, what was important, and I mean, at the time I wouldn't have thought about it this way, but, or talked about it this way. But, over the years, as I said in that statement, I've seen that, my work always kind of in some way was questioning patriarchy and going into spaces where I didn't feel like I was welcome or I was a part of somehow. And so, here you're looking at the foreheads, of all of these members of this committee. The one on the forehead on the right is George Bush Sr. I'll just continue. So I was really interested in, appropriation, and taking things, from the media landscape and recontextualizing them in such a way that you considered them differently. You can see a shift in what, what is foreground and what is background, or what is important, what is not important. So here, this is a drawing of the hands of Abraham Lincoln, from another, famous portrait that's in the White House. So I'm showing this, and these are tiny little drawings that, maybe an inch by 2 inches. So here's another series that I did at that time, called the Porn series. And these are, I shot stills from these 1945 softcore porno films, which I had come in contact with through my job. I was screening release prints at a motion picture lab for mistakes, and mislights is what they call them. So I was watching, these films really, really quickly and over, and I became really attracted to the places of stillness, which were generally the opening shots. And they look like that. I gave them blue frames, so they're tiny. These also are tiny. I think the overall frame is 16 by 20, and then each image is, what you can guess. And so I wanted a certain kind of intimate feeling, like how the viewer would have to come up close to look at them and then see the blue out of the corner of their eyes. There used to be a term called blue movies for these movies. So I'll just go through them really quickly. So in this case, again, like what would normally be considered, the background becomes the main event. So in a way, I kind of, started working on these long, longer and longer series of photographs that were cropped and, taken from various places. And it was almost like I am interested in syntax, and it was almost like I was making these sort of frozen movies, is how I thought of them. And things like, the porn series, slowing something down that I wasn't sure how I felt about at the time. It was sort of like, well, let's kind of just slow this down and see how I feel about it, or how I inhabit that space, or where I am in it. So this is also something from that same job. This was a cartoon, and I just they were Super 8 films, and I would bring them home and project them, and then shoot them off of the wall, and then crop them. So this piece is called Cartoon Curtain. And there is a little bit of a play, at the edges of language in my work too, so the title Cartoon Curtain, it's, the words kind of rhyme. And this piece was in an installation with a real theatrical curtain, which was a similar color. And then again, here, this sort of comes back to what really remained, one of the things that remained of my interest in dance was this kind of theatrical space, and a shallow sort of theatrical space or tableau-like space. So this cartoon curtain was opposite of this curtain, and then there was another long series of photographs that were appropriated from landscape books on formal gardens, and they were all kind of tinted the same color, this sort of olivey green. Um, so so after, you know, spending a long time with these long series of photographs, and I just had this desire to come out from the picture frame. And so this piece literally did that. Like I, you know, bought this piece of sheet tin and nailed it to a frame and kicked it out. And I was thinking of it as a kind of analog of photography. Like the detail on the left was a drawing I did from a movie, and you can hear already that movies are kind of important to me. It was a movie called Dinner at 8, and someone opened up the curtains of this window in Times Square and tore up a photograph and threw it out the window. And there was a hotel sign at a certain distance, which was a kind of a, just, I don't know, it was a kind of a trope. And I drew it kind of in the style of Stuart Davis, you know, which I felt like kind of rhymed with that same period. But when I made this piece in the early 80s in New York, you know, New York was bankrupt, and there were all of these tenement buildings that people would cover up, or the landlords would cover up with a sheet tin like that. And for some reason, they were always kind of kicked out. And so there was a kind of a collapsing of, you know, these ideas of, you know, New York in the 40s and the Great White Way and how it appeared in movies and what I was actually seeing in the urban landscape. And again, this idea of freezing movement. I mean, I felt like it was kind of like a frozen curtain. So curtains and thresholds, I would say, are a huge subject of mine, you know, and threshold states. So you'll see a lot of curtains and a lot of windows and a lot of doors and things like that. So here's another piece where it's sort of like, okay, that last piece, Hotel, it had like a surface that was reflecting light, which I felt was related to photography. And then it had the drawing part, which was just stuck on as an appendage. And here I made the surface or the skin, you know, an out of focus photograph of a forest. And then the structure, you know, a supposed structure on the other side. You couldn't see them both at the same time. And this is a sandwich board. They were used for kind of advertising at the time. So this slide is out of focus, and it was actually shot by James Welling in one of my early shows. I didn't notice that before. So these are two separate pieces, but just kind of showing that, you know, I kind of work in bodies of work and things are related. So this this piece on the right is called Central and Mountain, and the piece on the left is called Stunt Artists. And I will move forward and just show you. Okay, so Central and Mountain, this is a more recent photographic diptych where I was kind of diving into my archive on the left, and then a new photograph on the right. But when I made Central and Mountain, I was thinking of the, you know, bands and drummers often put towels or pillows in their drum set, and it looks like mountains. And so I was kind of thinking about, you know, rock and roll, you know, and then this marching band drum, I just could sort of see these mountains on it. And so I drew them. in chalk. And then stunt artists was, I went to a movie called Life Force that had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stunt artists. And as the credits kept rolling, I found myself getting really emotional, and I thought that was really curious. Why am I getting so emotional about these stunt artists, names? And I just, as is my wont, like if I don't know why something is having an effect on me, I just keep returning to it and trying different angles of approach until I understand. Sometimes that can take years, actually, for me to understand why I'm attracted to a particular image or object or event. But I sort of connected this to the drum piece in that there were these little dots between each name, and I was picturing this drum beat each time each one of those dots, and I also was doing a number of, I was doing a number of things in writing about, like, well, what is the role of an artist? Like, what do you do? I think I talked about that in that old artist statement. Just sort of being a stunt artist, or a clown, or something, was one of those kinds of roles that I was thinking about. So I sat in an oblique angle in the theater and took this picture of the stunt artists' names, and then I applied the drum mallet as kind of a vestigial flagpole, so it starts to look like a flag. So this piece, Movie Chair, is you may notice the same configuration as the mountains in the Central and Mountain, and they are also, it's not random. I mean, it's also a diagram for these two intersecting cones, are kind of like Venn diagrams. I thought of them as an intersection of how the beam of the projector would meet the beam of vision of the viewer in the audience. And so that configuration came up in a lot of different works. These are bronze, these mountains. And so if you see it from here, it's kind of like a set, but it's a little bit unclear how you're supposed to look at it and from what distance or what angle, which interests me. Like, how we orient ourselves around things is interesting, and making choices around that and different meanings, emerge from different orientations. So one of the cones of light is almost, paralleling the cone on the right, and the bottom cone of light is kind of shining up. It says, just, if you read it from below, it says, just like a movie. And then I had painted the word movie and cinemascope, and cinemascope was a kind of a curved, expansive format of cinema. So this piece, and was kind of inspired by a particular movie marquee in Times Square that had a movie called Harry and the Hendersons, and they had written the and the in this kind of cartoony way, and I just had this fantasy that, if that, and the movie marquee itself was kind of old and it looked like a little precarious. So I had this fantasy that the movie marquee was going to fall down, and if it fell down and broke, that the fragment that I would want would be the and the. And so I just made it, my fantasy fragment. So, I mean, I think that, conjunctions and connective tissues are always what I'm looking for, it's kind of, yeah. So, so again, Times Square, I used to live a couple blocks from Times Square, and that was on my route walking through the city, and I loved it. I still love it, actually. It's was called the intersection of the world, or the crossroads of the world at one point. And I love crossroads. I love intersections, and the more intersections I can get to happen in a piece, the better. So this was, I collected a bunch of postcards of Times Square that all had used what is called a twinkle filter. And they were all like focused on this intersection. So there's kind of like a perspectival vortex, like you're looking down into Times Square and into this perspectival cone. And so I was like, well, I wanted to do something with it that the structure of the piece paralleled how you looked at each of those images. And so I came up with this design for an inverted postcard rack. So you have to kind of circle around and look down into it. And obviously also it's a little bit of a reference to Duchamp's bottle rack. So I really, so cones and this idea of circumnavigation are really interesting to me as a form, and it comes up a lot. I think there's circles, squares, and cones, or spheres, cubes, and cones, and which Cezanne said, the entire world is made of those things. But there is a very formal aspect to my work as well, where I'm constantly reconfiguring those three forms. So this is, I call it the Rothko element. And I was working at that time as an apprentice film editor, and this was just like a head leader from a 35 millimeter film. And I just thought it was really beautiful. And this is an element that has, I just kind of have used over and over again in different works. And beyond that, it kind of just inspired, it was like a configuration that I inhabited. So because I was looking at it and I kind of fell in love with it, I started noticing other things that have that form. And, one thing is paragraphs, and another thing is our speakers, these sort of rectangular forms with rounded corners that stack. And so these first speaker pieces I did were found. You would see them on the street, actually, at the time. And so this is speaker one, and it was kind of made as a set with speaker two, which is kind of a king and queen. I thought of them as chess pieces. And here are the intersecting cones again. This time they're made out of window screen material that I sewed together. And I'll just go back for a second. So the speaker, I guess I could say, I'm just gonna read something because it will be less ambly. Speakers and amplifiers have made numerous appearances in my work since 1985. I've used them as sets, characters in a set, containers, frames for photographs, and as syntactical structures. So, I mean, they're also, I was initially attracted to them as structures that were analogous to paragraphs, film frames, and the modular units of minimalist sculpture. They are thresholds of expectation. There's a central void from which sound emerges, which is veiled by a fabric curtain. Speakers are squares with circular apertures with an invisible projected cone of sound. And then also a lot of the speaker pieces, I projected light onto them and played with the cone of light as well. So I mean, I've made like 30 or 40 pieces with speakers, but I'm just going to show you a couple here. And then I interjected this here just because you can see this is sort of the negative space of that. Here, you know, these, what is concrete in the last one, these two intersecting cones, becomes ephemeral in this photograph, which I staged. And it's kind of like like I'm bringing the attention to this particular place where things intersect, or where one thing verges on another. And in this case, this piece is called Sideshow. If you think about, like, you know, it's a sideshow of a circus or something. I'm not inside looking at the under the big top. I'm outside looking at this stake. So, which is holding everything up, you know, too. So anyways, back to speakers. So, you know, I became really interested in Marshall speakers, which were the most macho kind of speaker around. I have come back to them over and over again. I really liked their little, you know, kind of Magritte-like logo. And this are a bunch of frames that I shot in a guitar store. And I like this contact sheet because you can kind of read it horizontally or vertically. So this piece is called Marshall Stack. And I think of it as a kind of a site of multi-directional projection. Planet Mars is the planet that we project, you know, the monster to come from, or the enemy, or it's also the planet that's closest to Earth. And the top speaker would be projecting sound. Planet Mars was a NASA film that I saw in this kind of landmark exhibition called Space Photography. And so again, I shot the opening frame of that film, and then Runaway Train is a film that I love, and I tracked its whole, you know, sort of trajectory from its at first appearance as an ad in the newspaper to, you know, to its name on the movie marquee, to, you know, Runaway Train. You know, at the time, obviously you had to catch movies. So it's like catch Runaway Train, you know, at a theater near you. And so there are all these parallels, you know, between film and trains. And also, you know, I was just kind of thinking about unbridled momentum. And I don't know if you remember, there's a Turner painting called Rain, Steam, and Speed, which was like this symbol of the progress of the industrial era, you know, and it's also coming from the left, you know, and coming towards the viewer in a similar way. And it's like sort of, there's this kind of projection out of the frame, you know. So if you think of these three different cones, there's one from the projector to Planet Mars, one of sound coming out of the Marshall, and one of Runaway Train blasting out to the lower right. And these things are kind of encountering you at different points of your body too. Like there's a head and a torso, and, you know, something that's kind of hitting you below your knees. And I think about these things. I think that that we understand things not only intellectually and visually, but, you know, through our bodies, and how we have to orient to something, whether we're looking up at it or looking down at it, affects how we understand things. So this is just an installation shot from around that time. You can see the image on the left was the world's largest found photograph. It, you know, came from a light box on billboard, and I was really interested in thinking about photography as material, and not just image. So you get a sense of kind of this black photograph with orange, and it has on the right a picture of planet Mars, and on the left a picture of an earthling forest. And then this entire surface of that photograph is covered with candle soot, so it's very absorptive. And on the right, stack of shims. I'll show you that. So stack of shims began with this image, which was in my archive for years, and it was a tornado site. The roof was ripped off of this building, and these 3 trees are lying down. I had cut off all, everything except for the fact that it was United Press International, which is a wire service. And then I just, was very puzzled by this picture for a long time. And it wasn't until it turned really yellow and it was in danger of disintegrating that I realized I had to re-photograph it. And then when I re-photographed it, I became aware of all these micro layers. Like we have some photographer took that picture, and it's an aerial picture, and I was aware of that photographer. And then I was aware of the photograph traveling on these wires through, United Press International. I was aware of the trees disintegrating into the ground, and the image disintegrating into Ben-Day dots, and the newspaper clipping disintegrating physically. And so by re-photographing it, I kind of froze it. But I wanted to still situate it further. And there was something about, the building being, I don't know, just ripped apart, I guess. And that we're looking down into this thing that's disintegrating. And I felt like I wanted to build up to the image. And so these are called wooden shims that are used to kind of level things when you're building. And they're cedar, so they smell really good. And so I just kept kind of wedging them in, and it's, I don't know. Anyways, they sort of build up to, chest height, and then the image is at head height or image height. So I felt like it was analogous to the image, which had many layers going laterally towards the wall and into imaginative space, and the many layers of the shims climbing up towards the framed picture. So this piece is called Conjunction. So again, kind of just playing with, photograph and the actual object. I mean, this, refrigerators, appliances are, things that we encounter in domestic space, generally privately. And these amplifiers are things that are meant for public address, and I mean, at the time I kind of, was really thinking about, well, like what's over what, and in what relationship are these things? They're also, I was kind of fetishizing these rounded corners or trying to bring attention to that. So I'm going to just continue. So that was piece, conjunction, and conjunction assemblage. And it was part of an entire exhibition where everything was either black or white, more or less. So milk crown, and, there was a relationship between refrigerators and milk, and then the black things were like candle soot, and things that have been burned, or things that were absorptive of light. So milk crown is, based, it's a sculpture that I made that is based upon the Harold Edgerton strobe photograph of a splash of a drop of milk. And so, this idea of kind of, I don't know, I mean, it is freezing time, but it's also, picking this moment where it's come to the peak of its form. And it's different the way that photography, deals with time and the way that sculpture deals with time. And there's a kind of just eternal present in this piece that doesn't happen in the photograph. I'm also was interested in how we, collective imagination, like we all remember that photograph, I think, or it's, it's part of it's part of common memory. And so when you're looking at it, you're projecting or remembering this, this other image. So I'm going to go through this quickly. So then I learned how to drive and I moved to California. And as I was going across the country, I made this series called Road Movie, which is a genre of movies. And I, was, I put this here because it kind of relates to Milk Crown, I think. I was thinking about gears and engaging with something in a way that maybe isn't the way that you're intended to engage with something, but it's a way that you could engage with something. And this piece is called Holding Pattern. And I'm just going to go through these really quickly because I see that time is ticking away. So I parked these trucks. This is a setup photograph. In a semicircle. I wasn't really sure why I wanted that configuration, but I knew I wanted, 5 trucks in a semicircle. And after studying that for a while, then I was interested in, I guess, quickly, like when I learned how to drive, those forms that were previously speaker cabinets that were stacked and were temporal units, I was thinking about time as a series of rectangles stacked on top of each other, which is kind of the model of cinema, right? You have one frame after another that goes vertically through a projector. And then suddenly when I was driving across the country, it was sort of like, oh, okay, well, what if time is a lateral thing? And what if, each of these frames could just each of these frames could just drive off in a different direction from where I sit. And how do I think about that? And it was just really a kind of a paradigm shift for me. So I think that was kind of the genesis of it. But so after a while, I realized, oh, 5, it's not optical. It has to do with, the digits of my hand. So I found 5 identical little trucks and painted them and made this photograph. There's a photo of this too, but I wanted to include it to show you that I still do draw. Not that, I don't show my drawings that much, but this was also part of the Road Movie body of work. So, so we have, again, another threshold into the back of the truck and then down into this space below. And I really love the idea of a held open space. Like driving was terrifying to me because it was just this unbridled momentum. And so when I saw these trucks, could just stop anywhere and throw a bunch of orange cones out and that you could have a timeout in the middle of the street or the road, I found that really comforting. And it's a kind of a model for, I think, another one of these models for what I think I try to do, which is, hold open a space, where something else maybe can happen, other than just, what happens through momentum or conditioning, if that makes sense. So this is, actually a little out of order. So this is right before I left New York. I was kind of knew I was going to leave New York, and I decided to just take photographs, go around the city at night and photograph things that I liked about the city that weren't, just touristy things. They were just, these things that I liked. So I would just go on these walks with my camera at night, and I came upon this appliance store on Avenue A that weirdly had this, fluorescent light and these appliances on the second floor. And I just thought it was so beautiful and weird. And, it was like these appliances in heaven or something, because part of it was like this looking up, but they were all old appliances too. So it was this kind of like looking up at something from the past. And then at the time also, I had a job working across the street from this building on the right, which is the Lever House building, which was one of the first glass walled skyscrapers in Manhattan. And it was owned by Lever Brothers, and they had, all these little bottles of laundry detergent and stuff in the window for probably deals that salesmen made or something like that. So somehow, like, I conflated the two of these things, and partly it was uptown and downtown, and partly it had to do with cleanliness and also modernism, and the kind of modernist promise of the future, but what does it mean now that that's in the past? And so I took pictures of both sites. So you see and I plugged them into a contact sheet that I made. The green ones, they came, at night when I would take pictures at the Lever House, I don't know why they came out kind of green. And but I liked that, and so I just arranged all of these things into a contact sheet, and including myself looking at a picture in the window of the Lever House that I imagined was a Gerhard Richter color grid, but I don't know what it really was. And then I went beyond that, and I was like, well, wouldn't it be cool to just actually make the building, make it, to scale, and not just be a flat thing, but to make it the size of an appliance. So it's, it's about the size of a large refrigerator or something. And it's made out of the same materials as the building, and it follows the proportions of the front facade of the building. So it's made out of stainless steel, and then it's a light box. So it's kind of glowing at night, like both of those two sites were. Okay, so so this piece is called Earthquake. And I'm gonna just show you a little clip of it installed. I won't do the whole thing, but going to stop that. So just to say that you can't really, there's another sound component to that you can't hear, which is that these big speakers had subwoofers in them, and there was a recorded sound that sounded like an earthquake. It was really just very bass sound, and you could really feel it in your chest. And what you just watched would only happen intermittently, and it would be triggered at random times to go into spin cycle, and then the earthquake would happen. So you couldn't ever really predict when it would happen. And otherwise, you're just kind of watching this film, which goes out of frame periodically. And it was a 16 millimeter frame. And when you hear a film go out of frame, there is a sort of you can kind of just feel it, like something's wrong. It's not what is supposed to be happening. But again, it's, there's this very formal thing about circles inside of squares. And I was really interested in how, what would happen when it would go out of frame, and it would be half a circle on top and half a circle on the bottom. And so anyways, going to keep going. So this is somewhat related to Globe Sightings, series. So I did this series where I noticed a globe in a window, and I had this really weird feeling like of moving in two directions at once, and this kind of weird sense of inner and outer space. Maybe this is a better example. This isn't the first one I saw, but close to it, where the inky blackness of inside became the blackness of space. And I know that it's a model, obviously, of the Earth, but it was at a time when the word global was being thrown around a lot. And I had this feeling like that the Earth was just shrinking in everyone's imagination, day by day. And somehow in the act of photographing these globes, I felt like I was forestalling that shrinkage, like I was, and it's sort of ridiculous because I know it's a miniature already, but to witness the Earth somehow in its entirety, and to think about the bounds of public and private space. I could only get so close to, say, schools without trespassing and having the principal run out and yell at me. There are all different things about the angles that I was able to get, that had something to do with space and boundaries. And so I noticed one, and then I started noticing them and all over, and then I started hunting them, and it was a series of like 200 some odd photographs. Some of them, was almost like ghost sightings or something. And in some cases, I kind of, it was like street photography or space photography or architectural photography or portraiture. So I felt like all those different roles I was, thinking about as I was doing this. So anyways, I have this collection of these photographs, and I exhibit them as straight, quote unquote, straight photographs, but I also sort of felt like, well, what else can I do with them? And I decided to to try to create a structure or an architecture that, followed the perspectival angles of each of the windows as best as I could, and what kind of a building would that make. And so this almost is like the kind of project would be easier to do in virtual space in a way, but I did it, manually, like each photograph I printed, and then I mounted them on wood, and then I angled the wood and I glued them together. So it was a very, I didn't know what the overall shape was going to be. It was a sort of an accumulative or an accretion, of one thing after another. And I love things like that, where you start somewhere and you don't know where you're going to wind up, and that somehow the materials or the images or the objects, and your relationship with them shows you the way, and you wind up with something that's unplanned or surprising. So, whoops, wrong way. I also made another different one that was kind of more like a Tower of Babel. I started at the top, and I allowed myself to have blank spaces. And again, there's something about this one too, this relationship between circles and squares and cones. I mean, this one turned into like a mountain of sorts. So the circles inside of the windows, or the spheres inside of the windows. And then as these rectangles of the windows are moving around, they're starting to create curves, which, is someone told me is, it's kind of like projective geometry. So I, realized that there's always, not only there's a formal subtext, there's also maybe a kind of a mathematical or geometrical one as well. So what you're looking at right now is this piece. After I'd made it, you're not seeing the whole mountain. I projected light against it and had a movie screen behind, and the Paramount logo and movie logos are really sort of important to me. And so I was kind of making reference to that. And this is a public art project I did in Los Angeles in 2008 at the peak of the last big recession. And what I saw were a lot of, empty storefronts. And I was driving along Wilshire because that was my route. And I had this idea of, how, when windows are boarded up or doors are boarded up because there's a fire or there's some disaster, we tend not to look at them because it's like an eyesore, or it's something bad has happened and we don't really want to look at it. But I like the idea of sort of transforming that and, having that glimpse, what you first glimpse, doing a double take and seeing that, that these are actually curtains, and they're not solid, and they may actually open onto something else. So I worked with a public art organization, and these curtains appeared in different sites across Los Angeles. I think there's still a couple up in Pasadena somewhere. So, and this piece, Tower of Movie Marquees, this is yeah, I don't know, it kind of speaks for itself, but it's a stack of movie marquees. I like the idea, I think I put this here, yeah. I like the idea of, this, it's sort of a poetic idea, I guess, like of movie marquees, which are these kind of containers of promise, that something's coming. Then there are things that we ordinarily look up to, like coming down to earth, being brought down to earth, and then beginning to then climb back up to the sky. So I didn't include that here, but this, was a proposal that I still would like to do. And it's kind of like an endless column of movie marquees, just stacked, as high as I can go. And these were shown at what is now Human Resources, which some of you will know was an old movie theater. So it was a really kind of a nice, it's a very high ceiling. I think this piece is what is it, like 19 feet tall or something. I mean, it's very tall. And you see in Cottage Home, or it was what it was called then, Human Resources, the little projection windows. So the idea that what would normally be on the outside of the building was now brought inside. Okay, so in that same exhibition, I had these diptychs that were all kind of things being reconfigured, you know. So you saw this image on the right before. So I was bringing together two elements from my iconography and thinking about, like, okay, we have a globe. Mountains, you know, go on the landscape. Flags go on top of the mountain. And then, you know, and then we have this on top of the flagpole, this other sphere that's in conversation with the moon, which you can barely see in the sky above that one flag. And so the whole series of these diptychs were things kind of calling out again across a distance, and often across frame lines into different realms somehow. But I was kind of mining my archive, but also new photographs and images that I was finding. And, you know, I constantly am recycling things, elements, which you probably have been able to see to some degree here, I don't know, and bringing them into kind of new configurations, and, you know, or new media, new forms, and seeing how their meaning shifts. This is the piece that I did for Desert X. So it was, the invitation was to do something in the Coachella Valley. And I chose to this site, which was kind of between Palm Springs. It was on a kind of a main drag between Palm Springs and then the wilderness of Joshua Tree National Park beyond. So I kind of felt like it was a gateway area. So we'll just kind of zoom forward. This is the side going towards Palm Springs. So this, to me, to my mind, wasn't really meant to be seen like I'm showing you now. It was meant to be a drive-by experience. So now I'll show you a little video. Or okay. Or Paolo will show you a video, right? There should be sound. Hmm. Okay. Sorry. Okay, so I just want to say, can you hear me? Oh, well, hopefully you can. That was a little bit, Paolo, there was no sound for me and it was a little choppy. So maybe for the next video, hopefully we can get the sound going right away. Um, so, um, so visible distance. I mean, I really love that idea of the road movie, and also I don't know how easy that was to tell because it was choppy, but you know, it only lines the mountains only line up with the horizon for a split second, and you can't really hold on to it. You kind of have to let go. And so, I mean, I really felt like it was just the whole project was like perfectly situated in my mind between photography and seeing things through the screen, whether it's the screen of your phone or your camera or your windshield, and sculpture. There's an embodied aspect to it, and dance and cinema, and these repeating frames and expectation. And I sort of hoped that it would bring people to a direct experience of nature. I think it's hard to have direct experiences of nature without having the mediation of the camera. And so I don't know. I mean, those were some of the things I was thinking about. So we'll just move on. So here's another picture that led to a whole huge body of work. And I'm just going to show you a couple of things from that body of work, and then we'll stop. So this picture was one of those pictures that was in my archive for a while, and a newspaper clipping. I was really taken by it, and I wanted to find a way to situate it, and I tried many things, and it didn't really address what it was that interested me. And then finally, I think I kind of recognized that, again, it was like an aerial sort of view, that we're looking straight down at these skeletons, and that they're kind of looking up at us. And I felt like I wanted to situate them in a way that amplified that, or mirrored that, or made that experience that more palpable. So I cut through this stack of, I subscribed to the New York Times. Even when I moved to California, I had piles of them in the studio. And although I'm not a hoarder, but they come in handy. So I wanted to just actually have the experience of cutting through this stack. And again, it was physically just cutting with an X-Acto knife through, chunking down, as if I was excavating down to this site, this grave site. And I think about, the relationship between the frame and what you see in the frame, and how I've said before, like how you experience it in a bodily way. And, so I thought about choosing the front page section that related. So the framing front page section has some references to beneath cities. And then there was like a kind of like I don't know, an excavation of a collapse of a hillside. So you see all these geological layers. And I guess I was kind of thinking about the verticality of history, or whether history is these kinds of, little vertical layers, or accretions, and whether we can think about it that way. And I felt that maybe that model is not necessarily helpful now. And I was thinking about it in relationship to my students who, I think about news, I think more laterally rather than vertically. But anyways, I was using the experience of doing it to kind of ponder these things and experience them in a physical way. Um, and I was also thinking about, the resting places of images and trajectories of images, and how, how many images there are and how they travel and how they replicate. And if there was a possibility for, it was like, sort of like a thought experiment, and that, where if there could be an image tomb, like where this is the final resting place of this image. So anyways, I made this piece, and as I was making it, I was just, not really thinking about what was coming out of the excavation, although I saved all of the little chunks, and then I noticed that the little chunks were sticking together, and so I had them bound into these little books, and they were really sort of amazing, little random juxtapositions of what came out of this sort of core of this sculpture. And so I gave a lot of them away, and then, I just really loved them. And although it was kind of bad news, because all my career I've been making specific relationships between images, and here were these totally chance juxtapositions of images that were so amazing, and so in on one sense it was kind of horrifying, but anyway, so these books are very fragile. They're just newsprint. And then I decided, well, I wanted to do something more permanent. So I started, I made another sculpture, and for this sculpture, I very carefully, managed the excavation so they maintained their original order. And then I had a stack that was, however tall, it was like 12 inches tall or something. And had them opened like a book, so if you have this giant stack and you open the top one and place it on the left, and then you flip that over, and then I photographed each one of those spreads, and then made these prints, and was very photo geeky about it, and matching the color perfectly to the original newsprint. And I didn't want to scan them because I wanted to see some shadow underneath to maintain some of the materiality of the newsprint. So I did this whole huge series, and then I realized, I have all these digital files of these images. I can put them into a film, and the prints are very different from the film, and the books and the sculpture have very different, even though it's the same material, they have different sort of import. So I'll show just the first 3 minutes of the film, and then we can open for questions and answers. All right. So let's see. Paolo, I hope you can get the sound working right away. All right. So does anybody have any questions?
I would just like to start out by thanking you, Jennifer, for taking the time to share your work with us. That was really incredible. Thank you so much for being here today over Zoom. My name is Bailey. I'm Bailey Davenport. I'm one of the MFA candidates, and I'm the grad coordinator for the lecture series, and I'll be here to moderate the Q&A. The questions are coming in over the YouTube channel.
Oh.
Beck asks, how, if, has social media and other digital image sharing platforms affected your practice, both in terms of the types of images you collect, use, but also how you think about photographs more broadly?
That's an interesting question. Thank you. Well, I don't use social media at all. So I don't know. No, I probably part of the reason that I don't use it is that I have a huge collection of my own images and I steep and distill them and try to almost commit them all to memory. And it's almost overwhelming. Like, I think I've always taxed my memory to the degree that it can handle. And I just feel like I can't handle pouring more of everybody else's images in there. I mean, obviously, like I may feel differently after I stop teaching. Like, I see a lot of images of student work now, and then I do take that in quite deeply and consider it. But to have just this, mass of imagery, I don't know. And I feel, I know that did get confused when photography went digital. Like, it was hard because I used to have a very physical practice with photographs. Like, I would have piles of objects in my studio that I collected and all these different filing systems of prints. And then for a long time, they would just disappear into the black hole of my computer and I wouldn't know where to find them. And so, I mean, I wound up kind of going back to my old system, which is more analog, which is whenever I take pictures, I print out 4x5s. So I can do it the same way and I can locate things physically in a way that I can't digitally. So, so that may be because I'm old, I don't know. Anyways, so thanks for that question.
That's great. I kind of feel the same way sometimes about printing them out. David asks, what most influenced you to make the decision while in New York to commit to fine art instead of performing arts / dance?
Well, I think I was going to like 3 or 4 performances a week. And I was in a very intensive, period where I was trying to make that, determination. And I was studying dance at Merce Cunningham and doing contact improvisation, doing all these different things. And honestly, at that moment, I just, and I was also working at Artist Space and seeing art performances and seeing artists working with film and artists, art performances. And I was more interested in the art performances than in the dance performances. And although, I don't know. I mean, I think that the pictures exhibition, and particularly the work of Jack Goldstein, who was making performances and records and films, and his work was really, I thought, just had all of these elements of what I really liked about dance, which was a kind of theatricality and a kind of framing of gestures, maybe, and so and the people I met that were, that were artists were more interesting than the dancers, I have to say, at the time. So I don't know. And so I really kind of took a hard left turn, it's like, okay, this is what I want to do. And although I have to say, like, I also wanted to I also was very interested in film, and I was pursuing, I was considering becoming a film editor. And, I had all these jobs in the film industry, and I think if it hadn't been so competitive and paid so poorly, I probably may have continued doing that, because and also if I had stumbled upon, a film like experimental film program. I didn't, and I think, when you're young, sometimes you're just at the mercy of chance, like what, like what you bump into. And to me, I felt like I couldn't imagine working collaboratively or planning things in the way that you would have to for film, and also for a lot of, performance and theatrical work too. So. Thanks.
Thank you. Let's see. Frederick says, I see you have a studio in Joshua Tree. How has the desert influenced your work?
Well, I don't know how to answer those questions really. I mean, I at first I felt a little lost, because I had taken so much inspiration from urban landscape, and I didn't know. I love nature and I love it here, and it's so beautiful, like it's kind of hard to compete with. So, I mean, I think that's maybe why for the, the daily practice or the quotidian part of my practice, I went into newspapers. It was sort of like, okay, well, this is, the media landscape. Because I don't really think there's much point in photographing nature. Like it's just, you just experience it. Like, I don't know, like it's never as good, so, which was interesting. Doing the first piece I did about the desert really was the Desert X billboard piece. And then that was interesting because I felt that I wasn't just like plunking something down in the desert, which doesn't really, the desert, I don't think really needs art in it, and I was doing something that was somewhere in between, nature and culture, and talking about how we relate to it, or looking at how we relate to the two, So, but I do like mountains. I've always liked mountains, so it's interesting actually living near them, and it was fun photographing them for that project. So, anyways,
Yeah, that sounds like it was an exciting project.
yeah.
Let's see. Mega Kitty Cat asks, how long did you let a project sit or ruminate within your mind, if any, before you start making it visual or before you start rehearsing what it would become?
It depends. I mean, I'm a little bit mistrustful of new things and my first take on things, so I usually stare at things for a long time, or revisit them for a long time until the newness wears off. And then I feel like I have a clearer sense of what it is. I mean, occasionally, occasionally something comes fully formed in my mind, like Earthquake was a dream, and I saw the piece totally. I walked around it, and Tower of Moving Marquees also. And then it was just kind of making it, but usually the things that start from a fragment, I mean, it can take years sometimes, it's hard to say.
Yeah. Frederick also asks, what are your thoughts on the New York versus LA art scene?
Well, I think LA is kind of cool right now. I think New York's, I don't know. I mean, it's terrible to say I love New York, but I feel like it's gotten so expensive to live there, and so just dense, and for young artists, you know, you practically have to live in Pennsylvania to be able to, you know, to afford to live there, and the amount of time that you have to spend to support yourself, you know, it's just not very feasible anymore. Unfortunately, it's not feasible for, I mean, I think it's LA is kind of quite vibrant right now. Yeah, I mean, I vote for LA. So,
I'm a big fan of the LA art scene.
yeah.
Let's see, maybe one more question, or a couple more questions just came in. Emily asks, any new projects?
Well, I mean, there's more stuff that I didn't show you, but I was worried about, you know, going too long, and I already did go kind of long. So, yeah, I'm doing these sort of relief photographs now. And in a way, it's, yeah, I mean, I'm just in the midst of that, but I'm kind of waiting for to fall in love with some new weird thing. I don't know what that will be yet. Because the whole newspaper body of work, it's actually on view in New York right now in a dormant state in a gallery, you know, that's closed. Like, I feel like that was a 6-year journey, like all that work. Like, I made that sculpture and I thought, you know, it wasn't going to go anywhere. I'm like, oh, great, a pile of newspapers. No one's going to want that. You know, like, do you know what I mean? Or why should I do that? But then, you know, sometimes you have to do something in order to move on to the next thing. And so once I did that, it opened up all these, you know, different things. So I kind of feel like I'm ready for a new body of work, but I don't know yet what it'll be really.
Well, I'll look forward to seeing that, whatever it ends up being.
Yeah.
Let's see. Danielle asks, I'm interested in how your work might deal with a cut or reframing of the images from the original context. Do you see some of your work as a way of reframing our imagery or relationship to images?
Oh, totally. I mean, that's, well, you looked at, in my early work, I was really just priding myself on my cropping, you know, like, and my, you know, like, I felt like it was surgical, you know, it was very precise, like, about what, you know, how I would reframe things. And I think framing and studying framing devices is really important for artists. I mean, context is everything, you know, and you have the ability to build a context as well as, you know, exist within one. And we're all existing within these contexts of which we're more or less conscious. And that's the other part of what I think is important about art, is to use it as a tool to investigate, you know, the things that are influencing us, conditioning us, you know, and what we think is possible or what we think is, you know, yeah.
Awesome. Let's just one last question from Lisa. Do you have a favorite work of art? Perhaps your own?
Of my own is probably Movie Chair. And I don't know why it was just so weird, that piece. I don't know, but I still really like it. It's kind of like a weird model. But favorite work of art of other artists, you know, I think the piece by Magritte, Time Transfixed, I really love. And I mean, there's many, you know, I'd say, you know, but yeah, I'll just pick that one. So I don't know, get to see everybody's little squares and all their faces. How many people are there?
We had about 50 for the talk.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Yeah, good turnout. Thank you everyone who came. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you, Paolo, for doing the tech stuff. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.